A lot of the laws and regulations you just have to memorize, and it will help you out immensely in the computer security world. For example, like the good old Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986, which was revised in 96, which basically states that you're not supposed to hack something in a different state, especially any system that has financial, government, or medical records in it. If you do, then that's a federal crime. But on a technicality, if this system was to hack that system, that would not be a federal crime unless I was on an internet service provider different than this one and the traffic actually went outside the state, or it affected some sort of e-commerce. If it affects the e-commerce, then it goes to a federal fine or crime. So for example, if that had a web server and this system were to hack the web server, take it down because it's interfering with interstate communications back and forth, then it's now a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. There's a couple others as well, but the issue when it comes down to that portion, if you hacked your neighbor, then it's a state law. The majority of states have various types of laws. For example, like in Colorado, they have it to where the basic unauthorized access computer system, things like a class 3 misdemeanor. You can still get in trouble, get fined. Chances of you getting caught are very small, but once you do, it's usually you've gone way past that and tried to destroy things. Once you interfere with anything, for example, if you just connect to their system but you don't use the internet, that's class 3. If you use the internet, that may go to class 2. If you damage anything, especially maliciously or non-maliciously, it can go up to a class 1 felony. So depending on the state that you're in, is going to depend on the severity of the laws that you just broke. I know a couple states have it to where it is not express authorization. If you have open Wi-Fi, it's your responsibility, it's your fault. So if anybody connects to you, you are allowing that to happen. But most of the states are on the opposite, is that just because you have it open doesn't mean that people can connect, because that is theft of service. But I know that one individual, I think it was in Michigan, he was going outside of a cyber cafe and he was connecting to the Wi-Fi. And again, he did not have a very good lawyer, because what ended up happening was he got in trouble for connecting to the cyber cafe's internet and using their internet. And he, of course, gets arrested, and then he lost the case. The only thing he could have or should have had to prove was that he had some sort of business relationship in the past. If he bought coffee, even if it was 3 years ago, that's now a business relationship using that spam law that the organization can use or the business can use with them. Is what ends up happening is that if you contact an organization, you start the communications channel back and forth, they can now email you and send physical mail to you. If you purchase anything, same type of scenario, they can now start marketing to you. So you're now a quote-unquote customer. All he would have had to do is buy some piece of coffee or whatnot.
Talking about that, I think a site that has cases just like the one you're talking about.
Nice. So, yeah. Mind if I? Yeah, if you go to the DOJ, so it's the usdoj.gov. I'll go ahead and go to that site in just a little bit, but there's a sub page off that which has cybercrime on it. But then there's another case in Florida. This guy, not the brightest bulb in the pack, he parks in front of this individual's house. It's basically he's parked there for a while. Person comes home from work and then sees the person there. Instantly, for some reason, they think he's a census taker because they see his laptop on and he's in the vehicle. He's in an SUV. Well, they leave a few hours later. The guy's still parked in front of their house. The red flags start going up, but nothing too severe. When they come back, it's like 10, 11 o'clock at night. The guy's still there, so they end up calling the cops because he's been there for many, many hours. So the cops come, he gets arrested. He was also doing things that were probably illegal as well. From my understanding of the case, it potentially was CPKP related. But the whole problem was that was not only unauthorized access, that was theft of service, and a few other huge items. But what the thing is that the people actually had a red flag, and then they called the cops. A lot of instances happen to where certain things are not illegal, but cops get involved, and that's actually a good thing as far as being OPSEC conscious, because if somebody's doing war driving, the act of war driving is not illegal because you are receiving broadcasted signal. This signal is broadcast into the public domain, public airwaves. Same thing as FM, AM radio signal. There was a case in the 50s where somebody was listening to to his, I believe it was AM band, and he ended up picking up some Army communications back and forth. He is not as quiet as he should have been. Basically, he went told all his friends, probably went to the bar, told a bunch of people. Well, it got back to the Army. So the Army got upset. They sued him. They tried to get him arrested. The case actually went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, well, that was on a public channel. You didn't do anything to encrypt it or secure it. That's your own fault. He had full access to be able to hear it. He did not do anything wrong. And then there was the good old thing with the satellite companies. A lot of people were receiving free satellite for a while. And then the satellite companies found out, started suing people. This even went up to the higher courts. And the precedence was that you can receive anything you want, and it was the satellite company's responsibility to protect against it. So that's now why you have to scramble satellite signals, and then you have to have your descrambler on your network to be able to read those. So same thing with Wi-Fi. Since the person's broadcasting it into the public domain, if you pick it up, that's their issue. It's just what you do with it once you actually see it and get it. So if you see a username and password go over the air, if you use it, you just broke the law, because that's unauthorized access. It could be identity theft, could be all kinds of other things depending on the definition in your state and federal jurisdictions. Okay, in this area, I'm going to cover types of computer crimes and criminal profiles. There's privacy issues and laws. There's types of laws. There's IP, or intellectual property. There's, of course, investigations of computer crimes, types of evidence and how to handle it, and sets of ethics.
A quick question.
Yeah.
Are generally you held accountable to the state where the computer is at, or the state where you're committing the crime?
Usually it's the crime. There are precedents otherwise, but it's usually wherever you're committing the crime. And if you go across borders, then it's instead of state, it is now federal.
Okay.
So that's the tricky issue, because once you go from one area to the other, if you do enough damage, then it goes directly, for example, like FBI as opposed to your local law enforcement. One issue too, had a scenario where a colleague was doing a computer forensic investigation, and it ended up being that there was a server in Mexico City, and it had CPKP on it. But taking the hard drive out and shipping it to the States, that would be transportation of CPKP or illegal materials. So you can't do that. You can't get an image and then send the image across. You can't copy an image and then transfer it over the network, because then that's internet or international laws as well. So what they ended up having to do was a terminal session, and the terminal session onto a server in Mexico, and then do the investigation from the server in Mexico going back and forth. So only the pixels were represented on the system, but the data was not being transferred back and forth. So it wasn't trafficking. So there's many ways around things like that. And that prevented him from having to actually fly down to Mexico. And the reason why they were able to do that was because, for example, like a precedent in the Mitnick case. Some of the data, he got off by saying he didn't steal by doing a terminal session into it. So he didn't actually copy the data to his drive. He just looked at it through a window on the other system. Okay, this area, a lot of things they look for is the seriousness of the crime. Basically, it's crime is continuing on the rise. And the beautiful part about that part is that it's not just continuing on the rise, but it's getting a bigger spotlight. So it's probably not rising as much as a lot of people think it is. It's just it's becoming more known. How many people here know what the 419 scam is? The Nigerian 419. It's basically when you get a spam email that says, I am the ruler of this defunct nation. I'm getting kicked out due to some sort of overthrow. I have $93 million. Give me your bank account information. I'll dump it in, and then you can keep the interest plus an extra $10 million. And again, that's not a smart thing to do. So if you ever get those emails, delete it. Because responding also tells them it's a valid email address. People still to this day fall for that. So yeah, I got mine. The first one was back in, was it 97? And I guess they used to do it through regular mail or snail mail. So they would actually send these letters or these contents saying that I'm this doctor or president or whatnot to people, and people were falling for it. Now with internet, it makes it so much easier because you don't have postage. So you can send in 100 million emails every day, and it's not going to cost you a thing. But yeah, I first got mine in email, and I started laughing, saying, this is great. Wonder if anybody ever falls for it. But people know about it today, and they still do. You can go to the FBI's, what is it, the IC3.gov, which is, I think, the Internet Crime and Complaint Center. In this area, we're going to cover computer crimes, criminal profiles, attack types, and telephone fraud, or telephony. Okay, examples of computer crimes. Of course, there's the worms, the good old Morris worm, Blaster, the CLES. There's DDoSs, brought down Excite, Yahoo, and other large sites. A lot of the DDoSs, it's really interesting. Some of them are caused by some of these huge botnets, or these zombie networks. And there are actually groups of people out there that sell basically FaceTime on these zombie networks. So, for example, if you give them a couple $100s, they'll say, okay, give us the IP address or give us the domain name. We'll point and click, and then you have the power of our bots to hit that system. So it's relatively cheap to take down a server. It just takes some sort of financial transaction and a trust level on their part. There's also extortion attempts after stealing credit card numbers. Extortion, there's quite a few interesting cases out there. For example, there's this Russian group that was getting into systems, and they would get all the information on the hard drive that they could. They would put it into a zip file or some sort of compressed file, put a password on it or an encrypted file, then say, okay, for $10,000, we'll give you the password. And what that's going to do is set a precedent that now you're a valid target, but if you don't give them the $10,000, you just lost all your data. So if you don't do backups, that's going to affect you hugely. There was this one group based out of the old USSR region. And what ended up happening, I guess are Russian citizens. They were doing that type of attack. They were doing all kinds of extortion, stealing credit cards. What was funny with the whole scenario was the law enforcement in the States made this fake job up. And they were able to entice one of the individuals in this group to come over to the States to interview for the job. And then they had this fake network set up and say, okay, your resume is impressive, but we don't really know if you can do an actual pen test. We'd like to see you actually hack this site. So the person connects to an FTP server up in Russia. Everything was being sniffed because there were keyloggers on the system. There were sniffers on the network. So as soon as the guy downloads his tools, he hacks into the fake site. And then the law enforcement says, okay, we got you. You're now under arrest. Then they had 2 law enforcement agents then connect to that FTP server up in Russia and start downloading about 200 gigs of the data. The issue with that is because there was no communications back and forth with Russia, then there was the big issue that these 2 law enforcement agents hacked a Russian computer, and they demanded extradition with those law enforcement agents for international hacking incident. And of course, the law enforcement agency said no. We're actually going to give these guys a promotion. But all came down to the originators, the people that actually got caught, and the one that got social engineered to come over to the States to do this. They were stealing credit cards. They were doing extortion on companies. And they generally weren't a good group of individuals. There's also internal employee fraud. They're stealing military secrets and critical information from commercial organizations. And competitors stealing each other's computer information. This is a huge problem. Like I was mentioned before, as far as if you're a large enough competitor, it is not uncommon for Company A to hire somebody specifically to get a job at Company B and then report back information. That happens in the business world, it happens in government environments as well. Okay, criminal profiles. Good old script kiddie, otherwise known as skitty. They do not understand the technology and the ramifications of activities that they do. A lot of times they'll download a lot of scripts and they'll basically do the point and click. They'll say, okay, we want to scan this network for vulnerabilities or whatnot. So they'll put in the IP address range and then just hit scan. And a lot of these scans, tend to cause all kinds of problems like traffic congestion. Sometimes they'll even do DOSs on servers. And it's all because the individuals don't know what they're doing. They do not understand the technologies behind it. Not to say that a security researcher that downloads a script and uses it to see if it works or how it works is a script kiddie per se. But basically what they're trying to say is that these are people that don't understand how, why, and when to use things. Right. And then, I hate to say it with like the laws and stuff, there are some people that really pervert the definitions. Because schools, these kids are getting expelled, and some of them are threatened to be thrown in jail for a teacher walking away from their computer without logging off. And the kid goes over to the computer and then opens up the program where all the grades are and changes their grade. That's not hacking. That's fraud, but...
What you get from this site is that it shows that government is actually cracking down on the average folks instead of just for the big people.
That's cool, though.
What is the name of it?
Cybercrime.gov.
It's part of the Department of Justice.
And is that this big long link? Same?
Same thing.
Cool.
Same thing.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, thanks.
Jeremy, last thing you said when you cut off, is there a way you can repeat that one more time? Just a couple of words or two.
Script kiddie?
Okay, I'll make fun of script kiddie some more.
Yeah. Go ahead. It's already on.
Okay,
I left it on.
cool. Criminal profiles. In this area, we're going to talk about script kiddies, or otherwise known as skiddies. These are basically the individuals that don't understand the scripts, the technology behind it, the how, when, or why. When it comes down to it, you'll have a lot of the good old 14-year-olds that a lot of people make fun of, especially on the internet side, is that they'll go to Millworm, they'll download the items, and they'll just put in the IP address of the attack site, and then just try to run it without actually looking at the code and seeing what it's supposed to do. You'll see a lot of individuals that will go through scanners and engines that would be attacking a Windows server and then trying to attack it with a bunch of Unix exploits. That could be a vulnerability assessment team that just doesn't do the research ahead of time, but usually that goes back down to script kiddies. There's the dedicated cracker, which is a criminal hacker. So that goes back down to the good old definition between the term hacker. There's the ethical hacker, which is supposed to be the guy that does things for good. And then there's the criminal hacker, which is otherwise known as a cracker. In the past, it used to be the cracker was the code hacker. So they would actually crack the software, do things like that. And then the hacker was the guy that did the network. But they're trying to reclaim the term hacker and make it a positive term. So now they're using cracker. Yeah. Okay, these dedicated crackers choose a victim and carries out intelligence gathering before conducting the attack. So it's basically going to be the same thing as a state-sponsored type of attack or a criminal type of attack. They look for the item. They try to minimize the potential targets because they do not want to get caught. Okay, these are most dangerous. They're a lot more dangerous than a script kiddie. Usually does or has a lot more talent. But the problem is script kiddies do the majority of the damage because they're doing a lot of scanning. They're doing a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing. And they're a lot more noisy. So a lot of times people will be blocking out the white noise. And a lot of times the criminal hackers will get through because there's so much white noise out there. Basically, they're coming in through the fog of war. And Dedicated Cracker also has specific goals in mind. For example, if they want people within the organization to click on a specific email, they'll do research on the target and then specifically write emails crafted for that target. For example, even doing a pen test, same type of attack. You're trying to attack the system from the cracker's point of view. So what ended up happening is you'd go through, for example, like LinkedIn, MySpace, or especially LinkedIn, find out who's going to be a high-end target, such as an IT director, a security director, anybody that's going to be in the security department, pretends to be from them. And then what I've done in the past was craft an email that says, okay, this setup program is going to clean up some malware that you installed. I'm a member of the security department. I'll get the physical address that they're located or what office they're located in. I'll put that within the signature, and then I'll try to fake the signature to look as close to what their signature probably looks like. and then I will send the other targets that I find within the company emails saying it's from that individual. And then, of course, have a Trojan as a setup.exe. Sometimes we can put it in a setup.rar, and then say if the exe gets blocked out, go ahead and click on the rar, and then here's the program that you can unzip it in or uncompress it in if this doesn't work. So a lot of times that gets through because you're playing off an inherent trust, and that all goes back down to the intelligence gathering phase before touching the target. So people that have grudges, basically these are motivations. Motives for the attack, the grudge is I don't like the company individual. I was either fired from them, I still work for them, and I don't like the manager. There's also issues to where it could be the company wronged them at some time in their life. There's also political reasons. Terrorist activities, sympathy attacks, and of course information warfare. There's a huge issue, for example, Zone H, or zone-h.org. You'll see a lot of the groups are attacking, and they have basically a percentage of motivation attacks, politically motivated attacks. So it could be that they just don't like the organization, or they don't like a specific country, and then they'll put that this was a politically motivated attack, the rest were just basic attacks. There's financial. Why did the robber rob the bank? Computers are just a new tool for old crimes. It does take a new skill set to do these crimes, but when it comes down to it, they just want money. The problem is with computers, everything has a fingerprint. So what you have to come down to do is whenever the attacker's attacking you, you need to find out where the fingerprint's actually going to. The problem is going to be if they're coming from a non-extradition country or they're bouncing through it, because a lot of times you won't be able to get the log files associating them with where they really are. It's also business, competitive intelligence gathering through computer-related attacks. This, of course, would be your black hat competitive intelligence gathering, because regular CI or competitive intelligence is you get open source information, you may call up the company, ask information like that, but you're never actually attacking the system. This is more of the criminal competitive intelligence. Then, of course, the just see if it works type scenario, script kiddies. Okay, salami attack. Salami attacks carrying out smaller crimes with hopes that the larger crime will go unnoticed. For example, back to Office Space, where you have one transaction and then you're getting a little bit of money off each individual transaction. Data diddling, modifying data before it enters into a computer or as soon as it comes out. There's dumpster diving. Everybody familiar with that? It's I know when you have a pen test team, dumpster diving usually goes to the newbie. So it can be definitely a gross job. It's unethical but not illegal, and whenever you're doing a pen test, it is something that can result in probably the most or best information that you can do to attack a system.
Yeah, our land manager, when I was working at my job in Florida, he did dumpster diving at least once a month to see actually what he could find. He'd just go around to each individual dumpster on base and go through it and see if he finds anything in there that's pertinent.
Yeah.
That came off of the site.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people, if you have a shred policy to where you can't throw anything away that could have sensitive information, a lot of people only see that as being what's printed off the printer. Everything else that they write down on pieces of paper, sticky notes, notepads, those get thrown in the trash almost all the time. Or if a cleaning crew comes in and they see a bunch of paper on a desk and it looks like it's garbage, sometimes they'll either throw it away or they'll bump it, it falls in the garbage, and then you have this huge stack of sensitive information that is no longer in the building.
Dumpster diving is not illegal unless you trespass.
Yes, and that's a different law that's being broken. So,
it's not illegal to go in it, but if you're illegally on the ground.
yes. And that's a thing, for example, if an organization has a fence, that's one of those things that say you can't go into our dumpsters. So the act of going over the fence, then you can do trespassing. But if they don't have any fences around their organization, so I know a lot of retail places, they don't have fences, so you can just go into that area and technically live there. Okay, telephone fraud or telephony fraud. Freakers. These are basically just phone hackers. There's a 2600 Club, and for those that are interested, pass this around. This is one of the newer issues of it. You can usually get these at Barnes & Noble and Borders. I actually got that one at the airport. So 2600, it's the Hacker Quarterly. Or it's the quote-unquote official Hacker Quarterly.
And you got it at the airport.
Oh
Yeah.
Well, no, but it's
Yeah, and that actually did surprise me because usually the airport Barnes and Nobles or wouldn't sell them, so you actually had to go to the big brick and mortar stores.
What's significant about 2600?
Well, they have a lot of interesting stories. They come out 4 times a year, and it's where a bunch of people that are either phone freakers or out of the hacking community will write articles on how to do hacking and phone freaking. It initially came out because a bunch of phone freakers wanted to share their information, and now it's gotten a little bit more evolved. So there are some good articles in there.
I think you can still go online and download their index too,
Could be.
because that's how I found Smashing the Stack. Because that's an old article.
Yeah, that's FRAC.
Oh, Frack, okay.
Yes. Fra-
Then Frack, you can download the index. I don't know if you count 2600.
Yeah. With FRAC, that's another one based off Phone Freakers, and that does have a lot of good information on it as well. And then there's another one. It's had some challenges in the past. How many people here have heard of Blacklisted 411? Blacklisted 411 is basically a competitor to 2600. They come out every once in a while, but then they have big streaks to where they'll publish things, and then they won't publish anything. And then they'll go into another streak of publishing even more content, catching up on the time they didn't publish before. So it's been progressively getting bigger and better, but then there's big dry spells. 2600, Blacklisted 411. If you get a lifetime subscription or any subscription, it gets mailed to your house, there's a good possibility people may raise their eyebrows about who's actually reading this type of content. So I know a lot of people will go directly to the brick and mortar stores and then pay cash only. So.
What was the one that you mentioned, Betty? Frack? I'm sorry?
Yep, FRAC. PHRACK. It's online. There's a bunch of online items for it, like Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit. That talks about buffer overflows. And what's sad, I hate to say it, that's almost 12 years old or almost 13 years old. The code still works as far as buffer overflows. And that same process works for the majority of vulnerabilities that's still out there. Because the majority of people, even though that's been known about for many, many years, that's going to be the bulk of your denial of service attacks, is a buffer overflow that just doesn't have shellcode or doesn't have enough room for shellcode. And then a lot of your system exploitation is coming from buffer overflows as well. Okay, there's a good old Captain Crunch Whistle. The thing that made Captain Crunch Whistle popular is because it just happened to hit the 2600 note, or the megahertz tone. Then you have your red boxing, simulating coins dropping into a payphone. Again, you can basically do this with a lot of the older tone dialers. Depending on where you're at, sometimes law enforcement may see a tone dialer as potentially being illegal. Like there's the Bernie S. If you go to 2600.com, there's an actual story about this guy named Bernie S. that got arrested for telecommunications fraud because he had a tone dialer. And it doesn't go through to say in detail if he actually modified it, but basically it's a big case. There's blue boxing, using analog tones to gain free long-distance services. There's black boxing, manipulating line voltage. Then there's the good old wives' tale about the death black box, where you can actually hook up a phone system to car batteries, and then it's going to have this huge voltage spike go down the phone lines and zap the other person on the other side. But yeah, that's floated around for a while. It doesn't work. The black boxing, usually because whenever you pick up the phone, it changes voltage. So it basically says that, yes, the person did answer the phone, so now we're going to start charging. And so a lot of the phone services, that's when they say that the phone has been actually connected or not. So people would actually go through a black boxing technique to make sure to where the voltage wouldn't either spike or drop whenever the specific event happened, so it wouldn't actually see as the phone line was actually picked up. It would just be as a closed phone line. So you're still able to talk to the people, but the phone service doesn't know that the call went through. And of course, there's PBX fraud. If you have the usernames and passwords for the PBX system, there's all kinds of fun things you can do. The specific codes, you can get into the administration account. You can set up mailboxes. You can set up accounts. You can delete accounts. You can alter accounts. You can even reroute some of the trunk lines every once in a while, depending on the PBX. Okay, privacy. We're going to talk about privacy-sensitive data. U.S. and EU laws definitely have some issues. I know with the EU Privacy Act, basically it's a little bit more stringent than a lot of the U.S. privacy laws. So if you have to do forensics internationally, or if you have multiple entities, say you have an entity in the States, you have one in the UK, then you might have one in Africa and then one in Australia or whatnot. The one that's probably going to be the most strict is going to be the one in the EU. I know with forensics, a lot of people can't put the servlets on or put forensic utilities on the EU systems because the potential for gaining personal identifiable information, or PII. Here's moving sensitive data across international boundaries. That's another problem. Depending on the country, they may not have the rules and regs, so what's going to happen is you have to go to the least common denominator. For if you're communicating with the UK and then back here, you're going to have to encrypt the data for the highest law on either side. Whenever, what was that?
Harbor issues.
Yeah.
Do that.
And then another thing too is depending on the data, it could be illegal in one country and not in the other. And then there's also for the import-export laws, encryption. So if you're encrypting something, say if you have a piece of software that's a 256-bit encryption and you have a field office that happens to be in a country that's listed as a tier 2 or a blacklisted country, it could be a severe no-no for you to send that data to your field office out there.
Yeah, we use 256-bit desktop encryption,
Mm-hmm.
and we send consultants into Somalia. They had to remove it off their laptop before they went.
Yep, and also depending on the country that you're coming into, sometimes they may have it to where you have to give them the password so they can see everything that's on your system as well. With the U.S., the precedent is that the password has now been under the Fifth Amendment if you're a U.S. citizen, but if you're not a U.S. citizen, there are no amendments. When it comes down to it, the customs, they have the right to look at any goods that are coming from a foreign country into the United States. There has been instances to where customs basically says, okay, I need to look at the laptop, see what's on there. If you have drive encryption or if it looks suspicious, there's a good possibility they may confiscate the laptop, all under the auspice of trying to see what's on there. So if you are going overseas and coming back into the States, that's something to be aware that may happen. So if you do have sensitive data on there, either transmit it securely to a site that's inside the U.S. already, or encrypt the data. And don't keep it on your laptop. So, there's also employee privacy topics. Definitely there's a lot of data within an organization that definitely needs to be private. These are laws that you just need to memorize. Within Laws and Ethics, there's Privacy Act of '74. It's basically data held on individuals by government agencies. This basically means that the U.S. government has the right to store data on you as long as there's an investigation or need for that information to be held. However, with the Privacy Act of '74 basically means that as soon as they no longer need it, then they no longer have the right to keep it. But with the Patriot Act, that has altered the definition of a few items. There's the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986. Basically prohibits unauthorized eavesdropping or interception of messages without proper court approval. This again, the definitions, depending on certain circumstances, have been altered within the Patriot Act. And also the unauthorized eavesdropping or interception. If you are doing, for example, the good old Wi-Fi, that is going to be different because that's being broadcast. But if somebody has a good old tip in a ring, the good old wiretap is definitely illegal unless you have authorization. Or if you're a law enforcement agency, you have to have a search warrant. Then you go into the ECPA, and then also there's CLIA. Okay, HIPAA. This protects privacy of medical information or personal identifiable information. HIPAA is one of those interesting laws out there that doesn't really have teeth for the criminal side, but as far as financial, it has a lot of teeth. So basically, with HIPAA, it's going to be coming down to how many lawsuits are actually out there for how well the people are going to protect themselves. I've seen a lot of scenarios where, unfortunately, doctors may be very good at what they do, but computers are not one of the items. They're very good at fixing the person, but not securing data. Seen some scenarios to where At smaller clinics, for example, where there'd be 1 or 2 doctors, their Wi-Fi goes down or their internet goes down. So they may even hire a telco company or their ISP, switch out to the device, they're back up on the internet, but they're no longer encrypted. So their Wi-Fi, which used to have WEP or WPA2 with a radius connection, now has absolutely no encryption whatsoever. So that would be a definite HIPAA violation if because the medical records that are going from one system to the other, especially if they're connected directly to a hospital.
There's an IM. There's been some cases where the doctors were IMing, and there's no encryption. And they were talking about patients' medical records.
Yes.
They were actually talking with the patient.
Oh, even better. And then that's emails, another big issue with HIPAA, where a lot of people have devices in the network searching for specific information and blocking emails from going out. And I know that there's been a lot of complaints from the medical community saying, well, you're hindering them because they can no longer talk about cases. And that's one of the reasons why the law is there, because some of the doctors were talking too freely about the cases. But here's a fun, interesting thing as well, as far as back to the eavesdropping. Within the ECPA, there's been precedents to where somebody was doing some illegal activity back and forth through email. First Circuit Court saw a case to where somebody was sending email out, and this organization was sniffing over their own network. So basically what they had was probably a switch with a span port. The traffic went over the switch. They captured everything. They said, here's the email. We have proof that it actually happened. And this is actually being published by Guidance Software, makers of Encase, because it's a marketing issue for disk forensics as opposed to network forensics. Well, First Circuit Court said, well, because the stored communications caveat to the ECPA basically states that the owner has full ownership over all data on stored communications. First Circuit Court said everything in NVRAM is going to be quote-unquote stored communications because their definition of NVRAM was storage. Same type of case happened in Fifth Circuit Court. It went through there, and they basically said NVRAM is not stored communications, therefore you have to either have a search warrant or you have to have knowledge of both entities that this thing's being monitored and recorded. So what they were trying to do is, their definition was, as soon as it left the guy's outbox, it was protected until it hit the receiving mail server. So outside the network, everything's been protected. So what that gives the organization is a reasonable expectation of privacy for the individual that's doing the email. And that's one kind of precedent. The issue about that is if the guy's doing anything illegal inside of a company, then if the company is then liable for his actions, there needs to be some sort of investigation that they can do. And the caveat is they could have gone to his hard drive or to his disk and have done an actual disk forensic analysis on that disk to find out the email that was either still in his outbox or that was on his drive somewhere. So depending on the jurisdiction, where you are, what organization you're with, sniffing may be legal and it may not be legal without a search warrant. The GLBA, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act of 1999, protects individuals' non-public information. And this right here, does anybody know where the GLBA, what industry segments can be in? Banking, financial. In the automotive industry, going back to one segment that I worked in, it was relatively interesting because you see a lot of organizations that fall under the GLBA and they refuse to acknowledge it. For example, if they offered leasing, therefore by definition they were financial. So, okay, the EU privacy. European Union Principles on Privacy. 1. The reason for gathering the data must be specified at the time of collection. 2. Data cannot be used for other purposes other than why it was originally collected. 3. Unnecessary data should not be collected. 4. Data should only be kept for as long as it is needed to accomplish the stated task. Back to 1. 5. Only necessary individuals who are required to accomplish the stated task should be allowed to access the data. And 6, whoever is responsible for securing and storing the data should not allow unintentional leaking of the data. And what's interesting is this is actually a lot more strict than our standard guidelines. Okay, routing data through different countries. Transborder information flow. As was mentioned before, just like with encryption or data in general, depending on the country that you're at, Some countries are even forcing the distribution of crypto keys, or forcing the individual organization to backdate the software so the organization can see the data flow back and forth. But movement and storage of data by automated reasons or automatic reasons across international borders would be within here. There's different regions have different laws pertaining to the type of data that can be transmitted. For example, like the EU, if you do specific privacy information, you could get hammered if the same information is legal in the States. So there may be specific things or blocks you may have to go through, or bottlenecks to filter out content going to these countries, but then allow the rest of the countries to get it. Companies should research the laws before transmitting data through different countries. Again, like the investigation with the CPKP, Mexico through the U.S., transporting that into the U.S., again, it would be a federal crime. But if you were in some other country where that was not illegal or was not as illegal, you might have been able to get a bitstream copy and then transfer it over. Okay, employee monitoring. Basically, must be a security policy. Employees must be aware that monitoring is taking place. Many organizations have the good old banner. And the banner is a beautiful thing because it tells the people, if you're going to be doing your job, you will be monitored. These are the things that we're going to monitor. This is how you're going to be monitored. There is no reasonable expectation of privacy. Some of the better banners basically go through and say your email's being monitored. All your traffic's being monitored. Your email's being monitored. By the way, your email's being monitored. So don't say email is reasonable expectation of privacy. I've had certain situations where the banner would basically be gone through over and over and over again. So it'd be good, and then it would be taken off, replaced with an old one, and then updated again just because they didn't like specific wording, because the possibility of loopholes within it. Okay, to ensure monitoring is lawful, research and uphold state and federal laws. Do not target specific individuals, because once you target, that becomes harassment. Then only monitor work-related activities. Acceptable use and ramifications of not meeting expectations should also be told to employees. I know a lot of organizations, when it says only monitor work-related activities, they'll have it stated in the employee contract that they can only use work resources for work-related activities. Therefore, they get to monitor everything done on that work item because it's supposed to be work-related. With this, I know a lot of individuals that go to their bank, things like that, go to private things, which could be against security policy or could be against acceptable use policy. And what's interesting about that is there are some devices out there that will actually do a man-in-the-middle attack on the network, which basically allows people to do IDS, traffic IDS and analyzation on the proxy stuff that's going back and forth. So basically it does Cain enable, but it's more advanced, some of these commercial products. So if you do go to the bank on these type of networks, they're going to be able to see your username, your password, all the data that's going back and forth. And the benefit from a business side is that even though the individual thought it was secured or encrypted, a lot of bad things are also secured and encrypted that way as well. So they're able to see if data exfiltration is leaving the organization, because that's going to make HIPAA a lot easier to comply with as well. Okay, possible types of monitoring. There's keystroke logging, of course cameras, telephone monitoring, and email or data log monitoring. Okay, we're going to cover types of laws and their uses. There's civil, criminal, and administrative. There's also, we're going to, most of the stuff we're going to consider or talk about here are going to be U.S.-centric laws. Okay, civil law, otherwise known as tort law. This is wrongs against an individual or companies that result in damages or loss. Contract law and proprietary issues. Basically, case law is built on precedents. It determines if someone is liable for a specific activity, and then less of a burden of proof compared to criminal law. So a lot of times it's basically just the majority. If you have 51%, sometimes you can actually get a case in your favor, as opposed to like some criminal cases, you have to get everybody on your side. Criminal law. Basically, laws were created by the government to protect the public. In a crime, the public is seen as the victim. Someone can win a criminal case and lose a civil case, the same issue. Anybody remember a famous one that happened to? O.J. Simpson. He was acquitted, because if the glove don't fit, you must quit. And then he got sued in the civil side and then lost big time. Okay, it's a more stringent burden of proof than on a civil law. And one of the biggest reasons is because on the civil law, it's just financial. You can't really throw somebody in prison for things that they've done on the civil side. But on the criminal side, sometimes you can even take their life away. So they made it a lot more strict on common criminal law. Okay, administrative law. Different industries have different laws. Food and drug, financial, healthcare, educational. Can anybody name an educational law or regulation that's relatively common?
For education, for
Yeah.
university, they count that.
Like privacy, things like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I forgot the name of it.
FERPA's one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
FERPA.
FERPA?
And then there's also NERC for the energy sector. There's FISMA for government, for federal.
University can't, disclose your grades or
Yeah. Health information or
mental health issues or anything like that. You're saying like a mental health care worker provided by the university, they can't disclose that.
yeah. And that's a huge thing that again, a lot of the kids are not at legal age. So sometimes that still has to be shared with parents, but once they hit the legal age, it's still a big problem. Okay, with administrative law, these deal with industry regulations, and punishments can be financial or merit imprisonment. What would be an example of a company or, let's say, a case that somebody would actually be thrown in jail for?
How's it different from any?
Yep, insider trading, it's a good one from Sarbanes-Oxley. Some of the two, I hate to bring the names up, but yeah, WorldCom and Enron. Those are the main reasons why like Sarbanes-Oxley have been created and have been so strict, is because there were things that were not done legally, and what they wanted was to have some sort of pushback for any company that did the same type of scenario, to where then it goes back to the C-level exec. That's another reason why you really need to have the top management or senior management or C-level exec support on almost any security initiative that you're going to push, because they're the ones that are going to be ultimately responsible for the entity. If anything goes wrong, it's their necks. So they want to protect it just as much as anybody else. Okay, U.S. federal laws. Basically, this is dealing with computer crimes. These are ones you have to memorize. The Electronic Communications Act of 1996. This basically is the Electronic Communications Act. This deals with wiretap. It also deals with voice, and it also deals with oral communications. And basically the Stored Communications Act, which is part of the ECPA, which is the caveat to where if it's on a hard drive, then it's protected. The main reason they were able to push this back in 96 was that like voicemail. If somebody has a voicemail, if the message was not listened to, you actually have to get a search warrant to be able to listen to that because it's still quote unquote in transit. Once the person has heard the voicemail and it's been listened to, if it's then stored on the device or whatnot, or it's a saved message, now you basically if you own the system and if they're your employee, you can then look or listen to the message. So that's one big issue is that if it's still in transit and has not been listened to, then it's you have to get a search warrant or their authorized permission. I know that, for example, with the Army, they have it where it's one of the regs where you either have to have a search warrant or permission from the owner of the email to be able to read the email. But the majority of the other services and agencies, organizations, it's that banner says that we will be monitoring, so we now own it. You're ours. There's Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in 1986. This, however, was revised back in 96. And as you can see, a lot of the computer laws were touched again or created in 1996. That was a relatively popular year for it. This is to where if you hack a financial, a government, or a health organization, it's a federal crime. Or if you're crossing state borders, it's a federal crime. If you, I think it was revised in here for the anti-hacking law, to where if you hack something that does interstate commerce, it's also considered a federal crime. So if they have a website on their system and you break into that system, therefore you now just broke the CFAA. The Electronic Espionage Act of 1996 basically makes theft or misappropriation of trade secrets a federal crime. Here's the trick though. The trade secrets have to be secured as such and also classified as such. If you are, let's say, a bakery and you say your trade secret is your good old recipe book, if you don't specifically say that this is quote-unquote a trade secret, mark it as being a trade secret, and then secure it in a safe to be a trade secret, if you just leave it on the counter, somebody can copy everything they want to, and on technicality, they're not breaking the Electronic Espionage Act of 1996 because you didn't secure it and you didn't classify the information. Here's
Are there other words for trade than proprietary? The substitute
could be, yeah. You could use proprietary. It just has to be classified at a sensitive level or secured level, and then you have to protect it as such. Because if you have proprietary, and let's say if I have a bunch of proprietary stuff here, let's say the door doesn't lock, and I just leave it here, then if anybody steals it, they cannot get in trouble for economic espionage. And that's the interesting thing as well, is the Economic Espionage Act actually also put it to where the individual had to be within a trust level within the organization. So it couldn't be somebody off the street that just goes in and steals the stuff.